Welcome to Deep Thought, Ethnogenesis. Now I threw this out in a previous video just to see how people respond. Plenty of people said they wanted to hear about it, and it's really a process that encompasses a lot of things. You know, at the base level is definitely about biology, race, how a group of people come to be, but then on another level is about a philosophy creating a distinct group. Now, ethnogenesis, the nutshell definition, is the process by which a group of people is recognized as a separate group. And this group is usually not a racial group, but usually a group within a race. For example, you have the African racial group or Africoid racial group, but within you have several ethnic groups. You know, on the continent of Africa, you have the Akan, you have Yoruba, Hausa, Shona, Zulu, you know, myriad, thousands, literally, right? Each one, even though all of them are black, they are recognized as separate ethnic groups. I mean, people most likely use the word tribe. If you look at the Caucasoid race, you know, even though somebody might recognize them all as white, of course you have different ethnic groups. You have the Irish, Anglos. You know, you have the French, who are technically considered Latin, and there's a lot of nuances in there. Greek, you know, within, you know, the Latin group, also, you know, Hispanics. There are several groups within, ethnic groups within the Hispanic group. With Asian groups, there are several groups within who are recognized as separate ethnic groups. And sometimes these groups can be centered on some type of, you know, nation state, but a lot of times they cross across boundaries. Right. And usually these groups have like, I'll say very loose blood relations, because there are several ways a group can become recognized as a separate ethnic group, as there are two types of ethnogenesis, right? First, there is passive ethnogenesis. Passive. This is something that happens over the period of several generations, where a group gradually evolves to be recognized as a separate ethnic group. And usually what it is, they'll have the same language, they have customs, food, religion plays a part, to the point where, you know, after a while you can differentiate them from other groups. That's passive. And you have instances where that's happened in America, definitely. And despite what many people think, there are actually several ethnic groups in the African American community. In fact, for some scholars, the African American community as a whole is recognized as a separate ethnic group, as a whole, because it was there was a scholar, I think John McWhorter. And I don't know if this was his intention, but he had said the African American group got started in this country. And a lot of people got mad at him. They say, no, we came from Africa and all of that. But I don't know if he had a chance to fully explain. And I don't think people really understood. That's because if you look at languages, culture and everything, something new started. Or if you look at some place like Haiti, that was an amalgam of several different African ethnic groups that came together for one thing, so they recognized as separate, you know, and that's passive. Now, active ethnogenesis is a situation where someone makes a conscious decision to create a new group, and they might bring people together. They might start with some type of name or label or something like that, and then go from there, right? But before I get into that, I want to make that the meat of it, because ultimately that's related to what I've been talking about lately, starting with a philosophy. Active ethnogenesis starts with a philosophy. I wanted to give a few examples in the African American community, because actually, even though many scholars and many people familiar with this might label the African American community as one big ethnic group, you actually have several within the African American community. all of which are not labeled. And that's more of a political thing from both the greater society and also within the black community to more for solidarity purposes. That being said, there are some groups that would stand out as separate groups, including one group who technically, if they when people use that infamous one drop rule, which don't make any sense, but they would be considered a separate ethnic group. Like, for example, you have a group, they not considered part of the African American community, but nevertheless, they are seen as an ethnic group, the Melungeons. The Melungeons are a group of people. Originally, it was thought that they were a mix of Native American, African, and white, who reside primarily in the Appalachian area. But some scientists have actually traced back DNA, and it turns out they're a group that evolved from black men and, as they say, Northern European women. And it's not too much talked about, but even though there was some famous people who've been identified or at least theorized to be Melungeon, such as Tom Hanks or Steve Martin, people theorized that Abraham Lincoln might have been Melungeon. So it's like, if let's see, I think I'll put something in the description box about that, about a Wikipedia entry or something about Melungeons. But two groups that probably some people might have heard of, some people might not have, and if you have to really look at them as separate groups, one are the Louisiana Creoles. And that's kind of a personal thing with me, since my father's side of the family are Louisiana Creoles. One, they had a language, French Creole, which actually my father, he didn't start speaking English till he was 5 years old. And even now he speaks with a slight French accent. And, my grandfather could speak it more fully. They had specific customs, the food, that gumbo. Y'all like that gumbo. That's an ethnic cuisine. And I can't pronounce that little xylophone thing that they play. I think it's Zidago music. I'm not that familiar with my father's people, my father's side of the family. So, and that was just something I found out recently. But, the foods, everything. They actually constitute a separate group, or a separate ethnic group within a greater race. All right. And, primarily descended from mixed race. But then you have the Gullah of the South Carolina, Georgia region, like Georgia coast region. Now, this was a group, this is another group you can look up. And I'll have like the Louisiana Creole, Melungeon, and Gullah in the description box. They're an interesting group because they retain a lot of their African traditions. And then, there's some greater stuff about Gullah engaging in a lot of warfare against the United States. But that's another video. That's a totally different other video, right? But you could say that because they kept a distinct language, which unfortunately, and there's been many Gullah activists who are trying to retain it because the culture is dying out. So I'll have that in there. And ironically, Clarence Thomas is actually Gullah. English was a second language to him. That's ironic too. That's ironic because he came from a culture that retained his Africanisms more so than many other groups. And then there's probably a lot of other groups that are hard to identify, but they're probably in there. And that gets into some deeper science I don't discuss publicly. I have to discuss that with my mentor if we can share it, because there's some aspects of it a lot of people have problems dealing with. So, but you have those are examples like but then that's passive. That was something that just happened. But now I want to get into active ethnogenesis, right? That's where someone actively says, hey, we're going to create a separate group within. And that's an interesting factor. Like in the black community, an example could be the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem. I'm not talking about the guys who are on the corners and everything. Even though there's an argument you could say for them and maybe other groups, alternative groups that are trying to split off, even if they don't use the word ethnogenesis. Like I'm familiar with one, a small Pan-African group in my area who, you know, they're building something. There's a few small groups who might be trying to build something. And, yeah, they might not want me talking about them. But anyway, if you look at the African Hebrew Israelites in their history, they actually creating something new. They actually creating something new because one of the factors that help create a group is religion. You have many groups that are created through religion, like the Amish. They actually are seen as a separate ethnic group because one of the things that an ethnic group will do, they will marry within the group. They will have children within the group, and going outside the group is shunned. So what happened is, biologically, a lot of the same traits, unfortunately, a lot of the same diseases or whatever, whether good or bad, genetic traits will probably stay, you know, within a group. You know, it's a good thing if, you know, the traits are pretty good. A bad thing if it can cause medical problems. But if you look at a group like the African Hebrew Israelites, you know, you're talking a group that's through religion. One, they embrace a different religion from most other African Americans. You know, they have a different spiritual beliefs, but also one of the things that makes it interesting is their health. It's their health. You got extremely low instances of high blood pressure or diabetes, a lot of things that ail most African Americans because of their vegan diet and their lifestyle, how they live. And because of that, you actually have it's a growing group because they're having a lot of babies. And they should be seen as a separate ethnic group because of that, because then you having babies. It's very important. The mother's health during conception and birth is very important. Because whatever her health is, that has an effect on the baby. You have a lot of babies being born. For example, when you had a lot of crack babies, that was very significant. Because a lot of times you had babies being born with addictions. They were born with it, which will probably screw them up. And I remember a conversation I had with a teacher, and she said, "All these kids are bad because they crack babies." And see, that's something, you know, when we see kids acting crazy or doing a lot of stuff, we're not looking at that. So the health of the mother is very important. Even in I had read something about like some of the birth practices of the Hebrew Israelites. It's not like the children are not born into a sterile environment, you know, a hospital environment. It's like more like a birth center thing. So, you know, first of all, they conceived in a healthy body. The mothers are kept away from stress, which can affect it. They definitely not smoking, using drugs or anything. The babies are coming out healthier. And sometimes I'm not sure with the Hebrew Israelites babies, but I know of at least one instance where a young man I know, and he, haven't seen him in a while, but he follows me on social media. He was actually born without any. I think it had to be without a significant amount of mucus in his system. Now, I'm not sure how that works medically. I don't have a medical channel. But one thing I do know, mucus is a great cause of colds and a lot of sickness. So he was born extremely healthy. That's because his mother was vegan. Now, with the Hebrew Israelites, you have a whole group of people who were vegan. So the babies are going to be born extremely healthy. That would gradually create a separate group. Now, active ethnogenesis, right? And that's just an example. I'm not proselytizing for the African Hebrew Israelites or the Gullah or any group. But those are just an examples that you can look up for yourself. Now, active. If I were to say, I'm going to give you an example. If I were to say, you know what, I want to create a new type of person. And in fact, I have a book, a science fiction book, where I do that in a science fiction context. It's called the Sankofans. I'll have a link in the description box for you. But with active ethnogenesis, if I were to engage in it, the first thing I would start with is the idea. See, one of the things with philosophy is more than just how you moving through the world. You can create a whole different type of human being through it. You know, I'm gonna give you a couple science fiction examples, right? Star Trek. Anybody who's watched Star Trek, you know, you're familiar with the Vulcans, of course, but then you're also familiar with the Romulans. And they are cousins. You know, they both got pointy ears, but whereas one is more peaceful, logical, the other ones, they kind of wild. They a little crazy, you know. But they the same, you know, basically they still the same race. But because through a process of ethnogenesis, they actually became slightly different. Just slightly, though. They can still mate with each other and everything. So biologically, hey, same race, but ethnic-wise, different. That's a process from Star Trek. And then there was a TV show I used to love. It was called Andromeda. It was created by Gene Roddenberry. And they had a group of humans on there, an offshoot of humanity called Nietzscheans. And they got that way because they embraced selective breeding and genetic engineering. And the big thing with them was mating. I mean, and mating with the right person, mating with alphas. You know, alpha men and alpha women. That was like the big thing. And to be a Nietzschean, if you had a bunch of kids, that was like you were the man. So those that were in science fiction. Now, in the real world, if I were to say, you know what, I want to create a new ethnic group. And one of my commenters mentioned that some brothers had talked about that on YouTube, which I found interesting. I didn't know. But if you wanted to do that, it starts with the mindset. It starts with the philosophy. You know, you got to think, all right, I'm going to create something new. Okay, I got like 24 families who want to do this new thing with me. They follow me. They in my little group or something. First, it's the philosophy. It's like, okay, how do you want to do that? You would have to create the culture first. It's like, okay, how are we going to live? How are we going to live? How are we going to mate? What type of spiritual thing are we going to follow? Now, since a lot of ethnic groups actually created through religion, a lot of them. You know, if you look at Jews, say what you want about them, you can't really, many of them, at least the white ones, you can't distinguish them from other whites. But you got to see it, but they still seen as separate. Biologically, no, but still seen as separate. And I know there's Jews of all races, but usually when somebody's thinking Jews, they looking at a white person, right? So, you know, but that's a philosophy. So you got to think, okay, so are we going to create a cultural language? You know, it ain't necessarily a new language, even though some people have tried. There's been some people out there try to create a new language. But, you know, if you're speaking a certain language, what's the cultural language? What importance do it? What type of foods are we eating or something? That's a philosophy. That's like, okay, well, let's just use we're all going to eat, we're all going to be vegan. I'll make that easy. We'll say, okay, so we got this idea. This is how we're going to do stuff. This is what we're going to celebrate. These are holidays we're going to celebrate, right? This is what we're going to give importance to. You know, you might say, all right, so we got all this. We got a cultural language. We have a social thing on how we're going to mate. We're not going to mate during dating or anything. We're going to say, you know what, let's do this differently. Let's do this differently. We're going to mate based not on, you know, how cute somebody is or how fly they are or what type of game they have, but let's say in this group, we're going to mate based on our missions in life. So instead of somebody just going on a date, what they'll have is somebody sit down, talk with them, maybe have a matchmaker or something and say, okay, you be right with this person, like a form of kind of arranged dating. And because of the cultural idea, people will accept it. You know, and then we got certain foods we're going to eat. We got a certain way we're going to approach the economy. Let's just say, you know what? We ain't going to do it, so we're going to like try to buy stuff, and we're going to have conspicuous consumption, have the biggest TVs. We're going to practice kind of a minimalist thing. Just get the things we need for basic survival, you know. Instead of focusing on just everyday consumption, but just say, you know what? We're going to focus more on intellectual development or something. And see, that could get deep or something. You know, because that's another aspect to it. You know, somebody could consciously say, you know what, I want to create a type of group and future generations that focus on intellectualism. So say you got 24 guys, intellectual type of guys, right? And then 24 women who are supportive, intellectual themselves and supportive of that idea. First of all, okay, now say you get all of them young. They don't have children, right? So they say, okay, we're going to mate for it. And then there's some deeper signs there that, trust me, that's a whole other series right there. Some people on my private site know what I'm talking about. Where, all right, so we're both intellectual. Not only we're going to mate for that, because whatever inclinations towards intellectualism are there, will have a strong likelihood of getting passed on. Not an absolute, but a strong likelihood, right? And this isn't just native intelligence or anything, but just more geared towards an intellectual path, right? In addition to that, having having babies like with those basic genetic markers. You also create a culture which emphasizes intellectualism. So after a while, that's starting with an idea, and then after several generations, you have a group that's recognized as different. So you think about it. And it don't have to be just on some intellect. You could get a group, you can get another group and say, you know what, man, forget all that, man. We gonna become a warrior clan, which if you look at some groups like the Sikhs, you know, it's in their culture to always have a knife, even if it's ceremonial, right? And then you have throughout history, you've had like warrior clans, warrior groups, and stuff like that, you know. So think about it. Say, all right, our whole thing is going to be training. You know, because first of all, you're thinking more in terms of passing on like more aggressive type of genes or something. That, you know, you're doing everything else, language, customs, but then you're raising children up in a culture that emphasizes that. And what happened there is when the women choose men, they will choose men for that. All right. So I mean, shoot, this is getting long. I mean, you know, the whole thing of ethnogenesis, even why I'm even presenting it on this channel, is so much to it. I mean, you could say, like, in the black community, and I was just having a conversation with a wise brother, elder, right? He knows what he's talking about, right? He ain't too much older than me, so a fellow elder, right? But you could see some of that happening in the black community, a passive type of ethnogenesis. You know, when you see a lot of babies being born to, I'll say, low vibration type of dudes, low vibration type of women, that creates something that could be a problem. That you actually creating almost a permanent underclass, because you have children being born who won't be competitive in the future. Think about that. So anyway, right? You know what? It was funny. I said I was just going to do something just real brief on ethnogenesis, but it asks a lot of philosophical questions. It really does, because I just threw out stuff about basically eugenics. You know, in addition to it, like I said, there's a lot of philosophies that come into it. You know, religion. You know, language. Language is usually by people familiar with it. They usually use that as the marker of a group. And some groups, you know, you have some people, like when you have a lot of Native American groups who have died out, you still have maybe some Native speakers who will say, hey, we got to revive this. That's a process of ethnogenesis. So anyway, let me end this. I mean, this is one of those ones I'm probably have to come back to several times because it asks a lot of questions. As y'all see, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. A lot of stuff. So anyway, that's it for today. I just want you to think on this.